Thank you very much for joining us here as we are having a chit-chat, beautiful conversation with one of our senior diplomats from the African continent, Dr. Arikana Chihombori, and together with her is Honorable Cook. I've come to know him for the past few days. We just want to hear your quick reflections on the invite of the African presidents to the American roundtable discussion, or Galatina. I don't know what I can classify it.
Well, let me start by saying thank you guys for welcoming me. As you know, I'm passing through South Africa on my way back to Zimbabwe. And what a privilege, actually, to be able to spend a little time with both of you. I was not expecting to run into both of you here in South Africa. And thank you for putting this impromptu conversation and inviting me, of course, your wonderful palatial home right here in Johannesburg. With me, let me say this is Mr. Damian Cook from Jacksonville, Florida. He is the Vice President for African Diaspora Development Institute. He is traveling with me, and of course, he's going to give you his own insight as to what he is seeing as he is traveling throughout the continent of Africa with me. So once again, thank you guys for having me, my son on my right, Rutendo, and of course, Bishop. I really, really appreciate you taking the time for us to have this conversation and, of course, enjoy good African tea and African juices. So it is indeed a great time for us as Africans. It's an exciting time. It's time for us to really begin to pick up the mantle and chart the way forward as a united front of children of one mother Africa. Now, getting back to the issue, the question that you have asked me, as you know, yesterday, day before yesterday, I did an interview with Al Jazeera, where we were basically talking about the U.S. Africa Summit, which just concluded yesterday in Washington, D.C. In terms of looking at deliverables, what concerns me right from the get-go, and of course, I talked about overall the disrespect of the Africans, but the timing of the summit was rather interesting in the sense that this summit was being held at a time when Congress was not in session. Yes, we understand when it comes to foreign issues, you're dealing with the State Department. But when it's all said and done, it is Congress that actually makes decisions. It is Congress that has members of Congress who are members of committees on foreign affairs, and they make decisions on specific issues pertaining to different African countries. Wouldn't it have been an opportunity for the African heads of states and their representatives to be able to sit one-on-one with some of the members of Congress who are dealing with their issues, whether it is at a regional level or country level? So these members of Congress can actually hear from the horse's mouth in terms of what is really happening in their countries. My general experience is that the average member of Congress does not really understand Africa. I remember when I first raised the issue of the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization, which was signed by 14 African countries, forced to sign by France. A lot of the members of Congress had never even heard about it. Now, you have to understand that the average member of Congress, they're coming from Idaho, they're coming from Iowa. They've never lived, some of them have never been outside the United States. But because they ran a good campaign in their state or in their province or county, they made it to Washington. And suddenly, you take somebody who was a lawyer in some small town, USA, somebody who was a nurse, and suddenly they're in Washington. And they get to Washington, they are now put in a committee on foreign affairs to deal with issues in Sudan. What do they know about Sudan? And yet they're supposed to make decisions. And then when sanctions are thrown on Sudan, they have no idea as to how and why these sanctions are being slapped on Sudan. I remember talking to one particular congressman, and we were lobbying on specific sanctions against Sudan. This congressman is no longer in Congress, but his first understanding of the issues to do with Sudan came from a Sudanese refugee who was a member of his church. And that's where he got all his information about what was happening in Sudan. So let's be very clear that the average congressman does not understand Africa. Most people don't understand Africa. Africans themselves don't understand Africa, let alone somebody from Iowa, somebody from Georgia, somebody from Louisiana, somebody from New Hampshire, who suddenly ends up in Washington and they're thrown on the world stage. So I feel that it is a missed opportunity to have had that many African heads of states in Washington, to have had, and of course they came in with their representatives as well. Some heads of states did not make it, they sent their representatives. It's an opportunity for lawmakers to have had a chance to talk one-on-one with the horse's mouth and ask the questions that they want to hear, rather than getting second-hand information. I don't know why this summit was held at this time. Congress was not in session. The U.S. just got over a very rigorous election period. Most of the Congress members were out in their districts, very tired from the campaign that they had to go through. A lot of the members of Congress who are there now, some of them lost elections. So come January, they will no longer be in Washington. And if they still are, those who were still in foreign relations, different committees to do with foreign relations, dealing with different African countries, may not be in those committees come January when the new Congress sits. So that, looking at it from that point of view, whatever was discussed, there's not going to be follow-up because there's going to be change in Washington come January. The ideal time to have had this conference would have been after January, after the new Congress has sat, and there's going to be continuity.
New members are in at least.
Exactly, and there would be people who would have met with the heads of states, and they would have discussed the issues one-on-one, and there's continuity for at least 2 years.
So why did Americans? So why did Americans have this Congress at this time, knowing the congressmen would not be here? Why would Biden do that?
The only thing I can think of is that, for the most part, like I said in my interview with Al Jazeera, and of course I used to say it constantly during my tenure, just the lack of respect for the Africans. They're not expecting any meaningful outcomes. They already know what they want. They already know what they're going to do. This meeting is just a showcase. Nothing is going to change in terms of the U.S. agenda for Africa. So they're not expecting any meaningful input from the African heads of states. That's the only thing I can think of. Because when it comes to Congress, for example, they talked about 55 billion is going to be given to Africa over the next several years. Well, there's nothing new. That's nothing new, because that's already in the foreign appropriations, already approved by Congress. So they're not telling Africans anything new. The people who approve or disapprove is Congress, not the State Department, not the White House. So the people who are really important when it comes to discussing the issues pertaining to Africa, making sure that they really understand what's going on. If we're talking about the issues in Sudan, they need to talk to the people from Sudan. They need to understand, not using I'm sorry to say this, but the refugees, some of them, they exaggerate the stories. And I'm telling you from personal experience. So you need to have a fair and balance. We're not saying don't listen to them. Listen to them. But you must also hear the other side. This is a missed opportunity. Look at all the way they're throwing sanctions on African countries without really understanding what is really going on in these African countries. It is imperative that Congress has full information that is balanced before they start making decisions about Africa. And this is a missed opportunity. I don't know why they did that.
Do you feel these meetings are all inclusive?
When you say all inclusive, what do you mean?
When you calling African leaders, we hope you are serious and you are honest that you are calling all African leaders. Do you feel like the quorum itself was all inclusive? Because I think I saw only about 40-something odds that were invited, and out of the 50-something countries that are in Africa, what could have been there is a cause of the exclusion of the countries that were not included on the list?
Well, that's nothing new. The U.S. has always done that. even as something as simple as a State of the Union address. I don't know if they've changed, because I complained a lot about it during my tenure, where they would pick and choose which ambassadors from what countries were invited to attend this simple State of the Union. Just the ambassador goes to sit in a chair and listen and leave. But they still would say some ambassadors are not invited. They would invite ministers of foreign affairs, they will invite some and not invite some. There is no rhyme or reason as to why some countries are invited this year, but they're not invited next year. So this is nothing.
There's no rationale.
Most of the time, there's no rationale. I complained about that as well. To say you really just make yourself look stupid, because these ambassadors are friends, and today this ambassador this country is invited. Next week, for another one, they are not invited. And what do you think these ambassadors are going to do? They're friends. They're going to discuss over the weekend. They're going to laugh at the U.S. The heads of state, same thing. I
want to throw the last one before I can throw it to Rutendo. I know he's itching for the sanction story. But I would like to ask this one. In your diplomatic knowledge and the outlining, the drafting of protocols, agenda items before a meeting takes place, just take us through a normal, what the difference between a red tie, the black tie and the white tie. You pardon me, I'm an African. I'm no longer into the spaces of those ties. But in your own space, when people are talking about an event, diplomatically, what kind of preparation goes on between embassies at home and embassies in foreign affairs, but to a day when the function is taking, and what gives the class of the function itself, whether it is black or it is white or it is red, and the venue where it is being hosted, what value do you find, what bridge do you find in this event that will take place?
I take it you're trying to refer to the dinner that you were telling me about, when the African heads of states, the representatives, were invited to the White House.
Yes.
Well, in general, when heads of states are coming to a country, they generally have what we call black tie state dinners. Because it's a member state to another member state. Mm-hmm. And so they have state dinners, which are usually held at the presidential palace. They're usually, announced in advance. The guest list is released. The big newspapers will carry it, and it's publicized. People know that there's going to be a state dinner. In some cases, they might even indicate what issues are going to be discussed if it's possible to do so. So there are certain procedures that are followed before a state dinner is done. I don't recall seeing any of that in terms of the dinner that was held at the White House. So it's my understanding it was a dinner, but it wasn't a state dinner. State dinners are generally black tie. So this one was a dinner. But I'll tell you what, the dilemma that Africa runs into, unlike individual African nations or individual European nations when they visit Washington, when you're dealing with the continent coming to Washington, yes, you'd want to say there should have been a one-on-one of the African heads of states with the president. But let's be realistic, it's a lot of heads of states, and that would have taken a lot of time. But maybe what could have happened was for President Biden to meet with them regionally. That would have been like 4 or 5 meetings. Exactly, to say, let's discuss your issues. Where are we as the United States going wrong? What are we doing in your countries that you disagree with us? I think those are the questions that are not coming. It's more you, we are going to do this and this and that. But they're not saying, tell us where we are going wrong. What do we need to do in your country? What is it you disagree with us as we come into your country? There needs to be a frank conversation about that. And I think that's what makes this summit very different from the FOCAC. FOCAC stands for Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. That FOCAC meeting was held in 2018, where the heads of states listed exactly what they felt China was doing wrong and what changes they needed to see. As we speak, a lot of changes, the issues that were discussed during the 2018 FOCAC meeting, the implementation is going on right now. You can actually have measurable results on some of the issues that were discussed. And so, to me, that is what's missing to simply say, as the United States, what is it we are doing in your country that you disagree with us? But also make an effort to truly change. That is not happening. It's like we know better, and we are going to tell
Talking
you.
down on
There you go. We know what you need.
But but can that ever stop if African leaders left Africa without an agenda, without knowing what they're going to discuss with the Americans, and grown men went to Washington? What does that say about African leaders who went, and what does that say about them being respected if they can't even ask for an agenda?
That continues to be a problem, and I think I'm going to leave it up to the leadership and their various representatives within those countries, and by that I mean ambassadors, for example. They could have demanded on, if your head of state is being invited, you should at least have certain demands. But I'm not going to venture into that. I am going to leave it up to them. I'm sure they had their reasons as to why. The only concern is the same thing happened when we had the summit with President Obama. It was just another gathering with no deliverables, and so we wait a few more years down the road, another summit comes, just another meeting, just another gathering.
boxes.
But the biggest issue for me, the absence of the majority of members of Congress. This event should have taken place when Congress was seated, when all members of Congress were there. It's an opportunity for African heads of states to have addressed members of Congress. You need to put a human being to the issues, because they tend to treat African heads of states as these monsters who are just abusing their people, which is far from the truth. So for members of Congress to be able to actually see and be face to face, one-on-one
with those
with those, yes,
right.
to realize that, and I can stop right there and say, for example, my VP who's been traveling with me, he is just appalled every time we go somewhere in Africa. It is not what he expected. It is not what the media had shown him. It is really an eye-opener when you can sit one-on-one with someone. That needs to happen. We can't keep creating this image of the African heads of states when you are not taking the time to really put them in front of Congress, the people who are going to be making decisions on what goes on in their countries when it comes to U.S. Africa policy.
I'd love to hear your. Benson has been an ardent advocate for sanctions against Zimbabwe, and in the backdrop of this calling of African presidents, including the invite to Honorable Mnangagwa to come to, in the backlash. 2 days later, I saw a letter on the newspaper, the president has been invited to the States. Like, oh, wow, finally. So this must be a positive move. 2 days later, I see another thing, 2 people have been put on sanctions in the country. What relevance is this meeting when the American position is not changing fundamental on the sanction issues? What's your feeling about the response of the USA on sanctioning members of Zimbabwe while inviting the president to you sanction his son, actually his son, and another billionaire woman who has been put on sanction right now, and then you are inviting the father to a state dinner, but you're putting his son on sanction? I
think those are more specific issues that I think we can discuss them in isolation. What I can say, because you're looking at, we can take those issues and extrapolate on all the African countries that are currently under sanctions. But let me just say, in general, African countries are spending millions of dollars paying lobbyists in Washington. The lobbyists are being paid to do nothing. They are not delivering. You take, for example, this summit. The lobbyists are the ones that know the American system. They understand the way things should be done. Their job is to sit with that country. If the country is paying you to lobby for them, it is your responsibility to let them know this is how things are done in our country. So when they do things this way, that's not right. Refuse. A, B, C, D. This is how it's done. And if it's done this way, then proceed. They should advise them. They're being paid to help them understand the American way. Most of them may not even realize that Congress is not in session. and they did not ask the right question. They may not have known. You can't expect the president to know all those details. And then they may have a new ambassador who just went to Washington, and it's going to take them a while to understand the ways of how things are done in Washington. So again, you look at it and say, on one hand, they're trying. I'm telling you, they're paying serious money, millions, to lobbyists. It is the lobbyists who are not doing their job. They're getting paid. They should have advised these heads of states. But you know what? I don't think the dates we are being given for this summit are appropriate. Yes, and this is why we don't think this summit should have been held. Let's move it to that, because you want to go to Washington and have meaningful engagements. So I think they are doing their best, but America is a very difficult country to understand. And then to really go into the nitty-gritties of how things work, you have to have lived in the country. And so I think when you look at the millions of dollars they're spending on lobbyists who are giving them nothing, I tell you, I have spoken to several staffers who tell me that they're the ones actually preparing the documents that they later give to the countries. So let's say a congressman is the lobbyist. They can declare that I'm lobbying for such and such a country. They're allowed to do so. And if the congressman is the lobbyist, the congressman himself, he's not doing it. It's the staff. I have staffers tell me personally that they're the ones, they go to the website of that country and take the information that the country already has. And they fill in just a little bit and they compile a whole document. End of year, the congressman just signs. And there you are. No.
But then this makes it easy, because you've got an associate, a lady that you mentored in your organization, who has been saying that she has got a program where she wants to train Africans, African ambassadors, and African staffers in America on how the American system works, because she's worked in that system.
But it's not that simple, son. So we won't go there. It's not that simple.
Okay.
Because you're talking 55 countries. And if, of course, that includes the Sahrawi. That one is not that simple. I can tell you that. And I know what you're talking about. The bottom line is the lobbyists that are being hired, they must do a better job. But they're also abusing the Africans by not doing their job and collecting the millions of dollars from the African countries. Yes, the African countries think they're getting the advice from somebody in the inside, but the person in the inside is not. They're just taking the money.
Let me push on one question. I would like to understand, how do you feel? Women are struggling to get themselves into the business world. In Zimbabwe, we've got a woman that has risen. She's become a billionaire. And the Americans then target this 1 in a million, 1 in a billion black woman who actually has gone into business, gone into proper commerce, and they target her with sanctions. What is your emotion on that? How do you feel as a woman when the Americans take the war to women, children, and civilians?
I'm not sure exactly which woman you're talking about. So I'm not privy to the circumstances pertaining to that particular individuals. So I have to say, I'm not in a position to really respond to the specific issue, but what I can say in general, sanctions are just not the right way to go. Africans are being sanctioned for frivolous reasons. Same situations in other countries, Western world, they will not be sanctioned. So the unfairness in the manner in which the sanctions are being dished out to African countries is what I have issue with. Much to the same way that I had issues, I can equate it to the issue of visa sanctions of various African countries. I know for a fact, I was told that was not an African issue. It was an American issue. It's a very simple situation. If one wants to go to the United States, they go to the American embassy, they voice their wishes to go to the United States, they present their documentation, including birth certificate, including their passport. The U.S. Embassy reviews their documents, and if approved, they are given a visa to go to the United States. They present themselves at the borders, at the shores of the Americas. They again present the documentation and they're allowed in. Somewhere along the way, they violate their visa, the requirements of their visa, either by committing a crime or overstaying their visa, in which case then they deserve to be deported. It's a very simple matter. Take the documents that they presented in the American embassy in their country, take them to the judge, indicate how the terms of the visa have been violated, a deportation order is issued, and the individual is deported. What they're doing instead is they don't have the documents. They don't have proof that this individual is from Ghana, is from Nigeria, is from Kenya. So what they do is, oh, your name is Kofi, must be Ghana. Or sometimes they have an idea of where you come from, but they can't prove it. So they make a list of these people and they'll go into the ambassador's office and say, hey, these people are from your country. Sign right here, authenticating that they're citizens of this country. That's not how we authenticate citizens. Should we say every Smith that commits a crime in Africa is a British? You know, should we say every Jefferson is an American? You know, that's not how we authenticate people. They are losing, and I was informed by people in the State Department that the issue is not an African issue. It is an American issue. They are losing their documentation. In some cases, Homeland Security has even tried to say, ambassadors, you must go back to the village where they come from and find their birth certificate and come back. And I mean, just really bullying ambassadors. And I saw it myself. I've spoken to ambassadors who were being subjected to that sort of treatment to say, authenticate that these people, and I know one ambassador, he has since been called back home. He was told to say, in this jail, in this state, go and interview these people and confirm that they're from your country. And then go over to this state and interview these people in this immigration jail and indicate that, confirm that they're from your country. Then come back and sign, so they can get the deportation order to go back to for them to be deported. That is not an African issue. It is a U.S. issue, and yet I did not know this, but Africans actually are a very insignificant number of people in immigration jails. Other countries like China, they have the bulk. In Mexico, they have the bulk. China is the biggest. They have the largest number, but they're not being deported.
You don't see that on media.
No.
Let me share on a lighter note. You come to Africa.
Yes.
On ADBI.
No, I must conclude this. This is very important. Yeah. So you are looking at these blatant abuses of Africa. That goes back to the sanctions. It's arbitrary slapping of sanctions on Africans.
Without due process.
Without due process. And also without really valid reasons as to why these things are being done. I don't know of the specific individual issues, but I can say in general, that which African countries are sanctioned for is not applied equally to other parts of the world.
And animals are more equal than others.
Exactly. Wherein lies the problem. So again, it goes back to Africa must be treated fairly. We are simply demanding that what is done to the US must also be done equally.
Do unto others.
Do unto others. Do unto Africans.
What you want Africans to do to Americans. That's a new Bible verse, actually.
No, do unto the Africans what should be done to the rest of the world. That is all we are asking. Africans are being treated with a different set of rules. Their yardstick is different from the yardstick used to measure at the rest of the world.
In a world where we say it's a rules-based system.
In a world where we have the United Nations that's supposed to be the watchdog of
in a
these
world where we have
abuses.
human rights.
Yeah.
So
And
other
in a
humans
world-
are less human.
In a world where the custodians of democracy themselves
That's right. Don't follow the rules.
don't follow the rules.
Are the biggest breakers of the very same human rights.
There you go. But again, my issue remains demanding that Africa be treated fairly and be measured with the same yardstick that the rest of the world is being measured with.
Thank you very much, Mama. Thank you very much. You teach all of us new things every day, and some of these young guys who want to get into political spaces, foreign affairs, foreign ministries. I bet you we still have a lot to learn.
We all have a lot to learn. Life is a learning experience. We just have to keep our eyes open. But above all, as Africans, let's realize that quite often this story that comes out of the West about us, when you hear that story, always ask for the story behind the story. Because the story you are hearing 9 times out of 10 is not the real story.
You come to the continent for a few days, few weeks.
Yes.
You have been able to see a few places here and there.
Absolutely.
I would want to hear your reflect. Maybe initially, just tell us about ADDI, and then share with us also your experience. But I want to hear the contrast between the Africa you heard and the Africa you have experienced.
Absolutely. Regarding ADDI, African Diaspora Development Institute, and our mandate is to unite the continental Africans with the diasporas of the formerly enslaved, and just unite them and teach them about investments in Africa. What I've seen is nothing compared to what I've heard or seen by the media actually growing up and even into my adulthood, that Africa was a dying, diseased, war-torn country. From what I've seen thriving businesses. I've seen majority of what I've seen is independent self-employment. Everything from agriculture to retail to mining, and the amount of business that's being conducted within a community. Everywhere from Harare through Chinoy, I see nothing but self-employment. And in America, within the black community, you'd be lucky if $1 would circulate for 6 hours. I tell you, what I've seen, the dollar circulates hundreds of times in one community. Within just that one particular community, and it's multiple communities, you see. And also, in order to business here, it's about developing relationships. You cannot conduct business here from abroad. You have to come here, you have to be a part of it. You have to understand the customs and the traditions. You develop relationships as you begin to build business. And there have been so many horror stories of how others have lost their income and various investments. But if you come and you plant your feet on the ground, you feel Africa, taste, smell, hear it. It's a whole different environment. And then you begin to understand. Then you begin to build business. Then after you've developed relationships, you begin to build business. So it's nothing compared to what I've seen as a child growing up. Nothing at all. I mean, what was shown, babies with bellies, desert.
Monkeys jumping on.
Yes. But I see waterfalls. I see forests. I see just beautiful mountain ranges. I see lakes, endless. I see people that's healthy, vibrant, children playing and enjoying living off of the land, because the land is bountiful. You see.
Wow.
Absolutely.
From me, the last one, Mama. In 2 minutes, your vision for Africa.
Well, I see an Africa that is an amazing continent, an Africa that is just ready to take off, but more importantly, an Africa that must be built by its children. So my wishes for Africa is to see the unity between Africans on the continent and those in the diaspora. And by those in the diaspora, I'm talking about continental Africans who are recent immigrants out of Africa, and the historic diaspora who are descendants of the formerly enslaved. Those are the owners and inheritors of Africa's wealth. They must have priority to everything African. I would like to remind all of them that when China is looking to give out contracts, they never look outside China. They look into China.
Yeah.
The European nations do the same. All the nations around the world, they do that. It's only African countries that look outside, not only outside their countries, but outside the continent.
And once you do business with government, you're corrupt. Apparently, you're not supposed to do business with government. And
let me finish my point. The point I was trying to make is, we as the African diaspora, we also have blame to show. We have not been organized enough, where when international contracts are available, we are also ready, willing, and able to take those contracts. There's not even a one phone call that could be made to address the African diaspora in a united way. We are disorganized. We need to unite. So when we can then go to the African heads of states and say, we are ready. All contracts deemed international, we would like for you to consider your children of Africa living outside Africa. Give us the first right of refusal. When we are organized, that is the Africa that I'm looking forward to. An Africa that can be so self-sufficient that the wishes of our Pan-African fathers back in 1963, where they had hoped to create an Africa that spoke with one voice, an Africa with one military, an Africa with one currency, an Africa with one stock exchange, one monetary fund, an Africa with one stock exchange, and an Africa with one customs union. Of those wishes that go back to 1963, we have only accomplished one, which is the trade. And we hope that the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area will be a success. It's work in progress, and they need all our support to make sure that that particular issue is addressed. And of course, free movement of people is another area that if the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area is going to be a success, the free movement of people is a must. I do know that it is also another giant that is very difficult in terms of integrating the continent in terms of a single African passport and hence free movement of people. But nonetheless, it is a challenge that must be tackled as a matter of agency if the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area is going to be a success. That said, I see an amazing continent that is moving in leaps and bounds, an amazing continent endowed with amazing, brilliant, energetic, hardworking young men and women. When we marry them together with their brothers and sisters in the diaspora, it is magic that can be in the making.
Just one more question from me. I have seen Africa shying away from the legal battle with these issues that you talked about, where Africans are treated differently. The African Union, African countries don't fight back with legal instruments. So for instance, when we've got unfair trade practices, we don't go to the World Trade Organization. When we are being asked not to subsidize, the West is subsidizing, we don't go to the World Trade Organization to sue, like what we saw Brazil doing on the issue of cotton. With the issue of sanctions, we keep saying, can the United States remove sanctions? But we never question the legality of sanctions and the fact that people are being punished without trial and taking action as a continent against those illegalities. What's your take on how we can use legal instruments as Africans to enforce our rights and stop begging the Americans, the West, to feel pity for us when there are laws in this rule-based system?
I think that issue goes back down to the brainwashing that we as Africans have gone through, the inherent fear of those who don't look like us, the fact that we were made to believe that everything African was bad and undesirable and everything European was better. And hence our own brainwashing and being trained to feel that when we look and behave more like the West, we are more desirable. So the inherent fear of those who don't look like us, particularly white people, is at the bottom of it all as well. So those people in positions where they should challenge, they are afraid. They do not. It is a serious problem. It's an issue that we must continue to tackle, where we have our rights being violated. Like I just had a meeting with a group of, with a community, a mining community, where they have lots of mines in their area. but the mines are not paying royalties. And the royalties are due going back to the late 50s. The communities, late 50s. The communities are completely impoverished. They still live in mud huts, and yet there are 26 big mining corporations that are refusing to pay 30%. It's a simple, straight case of getting a legal team assembled and assisting them in making sure that these royalties are paid.
Glencoe is involved.
But what I'm saying is, you see a lot of that throughout Africa, where royalties are due, where those mineral assets belong to the people. These mines, these mining companies were given the rights to mine on condition that 30% of their productivity goes back into to develop the communities. They've done nothing to develop those communities. These are legal battles that should be, yes, these are straightforward legal cases that
enforce.
It's not even enforced to pay abject. These fees are due, overdue. They're just not paying them. So it's not.
These are billions of
trillions. Wow. Think of 30% since 1958 to this date, and they refuse to pay. So yeah, you're quite right.
It's a rate of about 1.9 billion.
We need to stand up and support these communities and make these multinationals. They need to pay. So atrocities are being committed everywhere in Africa, and we are not standing up, and we are not standing up for our rights. But I blame those of us who are able. We should go after those communities. We should go after these issues, and we should stand up and say what's right is right, what's wrong is wrong. Plain and simple.
Indeed. Yeah, well, that is Mama Arikana Chihombori giving us a very interesting take and some advice on how we should behave in Africa. And she's basically saying that when we do have legal battles, no one is going to fight them for us.
Absolutely.
We have to fight them for ourselves. Our lawyers. Let's not be used by Western countries, Western institutions to divide our continent. We must use our law degrees to stand up for our rights. Thank you so much, Mama. I appreciate it. And it's always good to learn from you.
But thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad I had this job in Johannesburg. So we can have a conversation. I never thought that the three of us could meet together and have this conversation.
Maybe the next one I must have you, me, Rutendo, and I'll try to organize Lumumba. And the next one we add Malema, and then we slowly until we're a parliament for Africa. And this is off the camera. I think I need to talk to. We needed to run down.